When I collapsed at the Chicago board meeting, the hospital called my parents. They never came. Instead, my sister tagged me in a photo on a yacht, sailing away from the corporate drama. I was the drama. Days later, hooked to machines, I woke up to 74 missed calls and a text from Noah. The transfer failed. Fix it immediately. Without thinking twice, I put the phone down. Before I tell you how I legally erased them from my life, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? I lay completely still in the intensive care unit. The room was blindingly white, filled with the sharp, acidic smell of antiseptic and alcohol swabs. The only sound was the steady, lonely beep of the heart monitor tracking my fragile pulse. The doctors called it a severe stress-induced cardiac event. My body had simply reached its absolute limit and decided to shut down. Trembling fingers reached for my phone, my arms heavy and bruised from the intravenous needles. I foolishly expected to see frantic messages from Noah and Sophia. I expected Mackenzie to ask if I was still breathing. Instead, the screen illuminated the dim room with a bright, cheerful Instagram notification. Tapping the alert loaded the image immediately. There they were. Noah, Sophia, and Mackenzie. They were standing on the polished teak deck of a luxury yacht, holding crystal flutes of expensive champagne. The brilliant blue ocean of Florida sparkled flawlessly behind them. Sophia wore a massive designer sun hat. Noah was sporting a brand new linen suit. I recognized that specific suit. I also recognized the distinct logo of the yacht rental company stamped on the life ring behind them. My credit card had been charged $4,000 for that exact rental just 3 days prior, right before my chest tightened in the boardroom. Mackenzie's caption was typed out clearly below the smiling faces, sailing away from the corporate drama. Nothing but good vibes and family time. I was the corporate drama. Staring at the bright screen, I waited for the familiar wave of panic and guilt to wash over me. I waited for my heart rate to spike on the monitor. It did not. The green line just kept moving in its slow, methodical rhythm. I did not cry. I did not hyperventilate. For the first time in 7 years, I felt absolutely nothing. Just a cold, hollow emptiness spreading through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. Scrolling down to the comments section revealed a flood of validation for their manufactured reality. Beautiful family, you guys deserve a break. So jealous of your perfect life. They were living a flawless life, entirely funded by the woman currently hooked to life support machines in a hospital thousands of miles away. My finger hovered over the screen. The urge to call Noah and scream at him flashed briefly, but the words evaporated in my dry throat. They knew exactly where I was. The hospital administration had confirmed leaving 4 urgent voicemails with my emergency contacts. They had simply chosen the yacht. As I stared at the smiling faces of the people who shared my blood, my eyes drifted away from their champagne flutes. I noticed something else in the image. Something small. Tucked away in the background of that perfectly curated photo, I saw the shadow. To the outside world, Lucy Hayes was an undeniable success story. I was a senior corporate restructuring consultant at one of the top-tier management firms in Chicago. I wore perfectly tailored suits. I carried a leather briefcase that cost more than most people's first vehicles. My weeks were spent staying in luxury business hotels across the country, constantly flying on red-eye flights to salvage broken companies. Whenever a massive corporation was bleeding money and facing bankruptcy, my firm sent me in to clean up the mess. Lucy will fix the math, my managing director always said. I was the dependable one. I fixed everyone else's financial ruin, but I was entirely bankrupt myself. I lived in a tiny, overpriced apartment in the city that I barely spent any time in. My refrigerator held nothing but bottled water and expired yogurt. Dinners usually consisted of stale protein bars eaten in the back of a taxi cab at midnight. People in my office thought I was fiercely ambitious. They thought I was ruthlessly climbing the corporate ladder because I loved the thrill of the view. They were completely wrong. I was not ambitious. I was trapped. My massive corporate salary was never my own to keep. It was a vital lifeline for 3 able-bodied adults who absolutely refused to swim. I was a machine designed solely to generate wealth for Noah, Sophia, Mackenzie, and Colton. Every 15th and 30th of the month, I performed a deeply depressing ritual. Opening my mobile banking application, I would look at the large, solid number of my paycheck hitting the account. Then the systematic draining would begin. Transfer 1, transfer 2, transfer 3. By the time I finished organizing their lives, my account was an empty wasteland. I kept just enough capital to cover my basic rent and my transportation back to the airport. I wore the same 3 suits on a continuous rotation. I had not purchased a new pair of shoes in 4 years. Constantly convincing myself that this was simply what a good family did, I justified the bleeding. You take care of your own blood. You step up to the plate when things get difficult. But things were not difficult for them. Things were comfortable. Things were exceptionally luxurious. I was the unseen engine powering their country club memberships, their influencer aesthetics, and their endless failed business ventures. Running entirely on fumes, drinking 6 cups of black coffee a day, I ignored the constant dull ache behind my ribs. I ignored the glaring warning signs until my body aggressively forced me to pay attention. The corporate machine finally broke down. As I lay in the hospital bed, the reality of my existence settled over me like a heavy lead blanket. I had sacrificed my youth, my physical health, and my mental peace for a complete mirage. I was nothing but a walking ledger to them. The illusion was dead. Forcing myself to continue scrolling through the 74 missed calls on my device, the sheer volume of the red notifications felt suffocating. There were aggressive texts from Noah, demanding to know why the automatic mortgage transfer had bounced. There were dramatic messages from Mackenzie, complaining that her landlord was threatening her because her rent check had not cleared. Colton was sending passive-aggressive paragraphs about his newest cryptocurrency venture needing capital immediately to secure a position. There was not a single question about my medical status. Not a single inquiry about the intensive care unit I was currently trapped inside. I was about to turn the device off entirely and throw it into the drawer when a different notification caught my eye. Pushed down to the very bottom of the notification center were 5 missed audio calls on FaceTime. They were not from Noah. They were not from Sophia. They were from an old, battered tablet device I had purchased 3 years ago. The digital account belonged to Ruby. Ruby was Mackenzie's 7-year-old daughter, my niece. She was the only pure, untainted thing remaining in our entirely corrupted bloodline. My hands shook as I pressed play on the single audio voicemail she had managed to leave. The recording was staticky, filled with the ambient background noise of wind and distant seagulls from their yacht trip. Auntie Lucy. Her voice was a small, fragile whisper through the speaker. "Are you sick?" Mommy said you were just making a big drama again to ruin their vacation. "I drew you a green sea turtle. I miss." The audio cut out abruptly. The sharp sound of the device being snatched away from small hands echoed through the speaker. I could hear Mackenzie's irritated, scolding voice echoing in the background. "Give me that right now. We are not talking to her. She is just being selfish." Then the line went completely dead. The silence that followed in my hospital room was deafening. That was the exact moment the first tear finally broke free. It slid down my cheek, hot and stinging against the medical tape holding my intravenous line in place. Ruby was 7 years old. She was being raised by a mother who saw her as an inconvenience, a visual prop for social media photos, or a massive burden to be handed off to cheap nannies. I was the one who quietly paid her private school tuition every semester. I was the one who covered her expensive asthma medication because Mackenzie constantly claimed it did not fit into her aesthetic lifestyle budget. If I disappeared, if my heart simply refused to restart the next time I collapsed in a boardroom, what would happen to that little girl? She was surrounded by absolute leeches. She would become exactly like them, or she would be entirely consumed by them. Wiping my face roughly with the back of my bruised hand, the cold emptiness inside me was suddenly replaced by a quiet, burning focus. I could not just give up. I could not simply let the machine die and leave her behind. I had to survive. How did a seasoned corporate consultant, a woman who ruthlessly dismantled failing companies and fired incompetent executives for a living, allow herself to be bled dry by her own relatives? The answer is not simple. It is a psychological chain forged link by link over a lifetime of manipulation. Professionals call it learned helplessness. It starts when you are very young, and it effectively masquerades as love. Closing my tired eyes, I let the clinical beep of the monitor pull my memory back 7 years. I was 22 years old, fresh out of a demanding university program, clutching my very first significant corporate paycheck. I had driven straight to my parents' house, practically vibrating with pride and excitement. I wanted to celebrate my achievement. Instead, I walked directly into a perfectly staged crisis. Noah was sitting at the dark oak kitchen table, his head buried in his hands, looking utterly defeated. Sophia was weeping softly into a tissue, her shoulders shaking. The bank was actively threatening foreclosure, they claimed. Noah's independent consulting business had failed yet again. They were going to lose the house. The grand, sprawling suburban house I grew up in. We just do not know what to do, Lucy Sophia had sobbed, looking up at me with wide, desperate, tear-filled eyes. You are our absolute only hope right now. You are the successful one. The golden child. That was the psychological trap. The golden child. It is a title that sounds like a beautiful blessing, but it is actually a lifelong sentence. It means you are the designated savior of the family structure. It means your personal achievements belong to the collective. Noah silently slid the massive mortgage statement across the polished table. $4,000 a month. It was more than half of my new monthly salary. I hesitated. Concrete plans for my own life had been taking shape in my mind. I wanted to save for property. I wanted to build a secure future. But Sophia reached out and touched my hand, her grip tight and frantic. Families protect each other, Lucy. Without this house, we are absolutely nothing. I signed the banking paperwork that afternoon. Setting up the automatic monthly transfer felt like doing the noble thing. I genuinely believed I was saving them from ruin. I believed it would be a temporary arrangement to get them back on their feet. I did not realize I was willingly putting on a collar and handing them the leather leash. Year after year, the financial demands steadily grew. The temporary mortgage assistance became a permanent baseline. Every time I tried to pull back, Sophia would expertly weaponize her stress, clutching her chest and claiming I was abandoning them to the wolves. Noah would call me ungrateful and disgustingly selfish. The guilt was a physical weight crushing my lungs and keeping me compliant. Conditioned to believe my sole purpose on earth was their comfort, I was completely brainwashed. But lying in the hospital bed, staring at the sterile ceiling, the brainwashing finally cracked. The invisible chain snapped into pieces. The guilt was gone. I needed to look at the hard numbers. I needed to clearly see the exact shape and scope of my own exploitation. My silver laptop was safely tucked inside my leather work bag at the bottom of the narrow hospital closet. Slowly swinging my legs over the edge of the mattress, the medical monitors beeped in mild protest as I carefully unplugged the secondary tracking sensors. My leg muscles shook violently from days of atrophy, but the cold clarity pushing me forward was significantly stronger than the physical weakness. Pulling the heavy laptop onto my lap, I opened the secure banking application. The interface loaded quickly, revealing the desolate, barren landscape of my personal finances. Clicking directly into the historical transaction ledger forced me to stare at the undeniable evidence of their greed. First on the list was Mackenzie, $3,500, leaving my account on the first of every single month like clockwork. It was intentionally categorized as emergency rent assistance. It had been a dire emergency for 36 consecutive months. She desperately needed that specific luxury downtown loft to secure high-paying brand deals, she claimed. If she lost the natural lighting in that apartment, her influencer career would end and it would be entirely my fault. Then there was Colton, my 30-year-old brother who still lived comfortably in Noah and Sophia's finished basement. The ledger showed a massive outgoing wire transfer from late last year. $50,000. Legally labeled seed funding Colton had aggressively convinced them all that he was the next cryptocurrency visionary. He just needed the initial capital to launch his platform. When I initially refused the absurd request, Sophia called me crying hysterically, saying I was suffocating my brother's brilliant potential out of sheer sibling jealousy. The $50,000 evaporated into the digital void in less than 3 months. Colton was currently unemployed and actively looking into professional video gaming as a primary career path. And finally, Noah and Sophia. The $4,000 monthly mortgage was just the baseline requirement. Below it were the endless, infuriating auxiliary charges. $800 for Sophia's exclusive country club membership dues. We have to maintain our appearances, Lucy. She would lecture me over the phone. If the club members know we are struggling financially, your father will never get another consulting contract. It was an absolute terrifying delusion. Noah had not closed a single business deal in 8 years. They were playing dress-up with my lifeblood. Scrolling through the endless pages of transactions revealed dinners at 5-star steakhouses, upgraded lease vehicles, and designer handbags. They were living the lives of wealthy socialites, and I was the unseen coal shoveler keeping their luxury liner moving forward. I felt violently sick to my stomach, not from the medical event, but from the sheer audacity of their greed. They had drained over $450,000 from me over the last 7 years. I funded my own ruin. Amidst the suffocating realization of my financial ruin, my exhausted mind drifted to the only person in our bloodline who had ever seen through the elaborate facade, Aunt Gloria. She was Sophia's older sister, but they could not have been more fundamentally different if they were born on separate planets. While Sophia spent her entire adult life desperately chasing country club memberships and obsessing over the superficial aesthetics of wealth, Gloria had built actual, tangible power. She was a former corporate litigator, a woman who used to ruthlessly dismantle massive corporate mergers before she simply decided she had enough of the noise. 10 years ago, Gloria packed up her life, left the suffocating high society circles of the city, and moved to a quiet, isolated coastal town in Maine. Trading tailored designer dresses for thick wool sweaters, she exchanged fake cocktail parties for the absolute silence of the ocean. My parents openly despised her. Noah constantly called her a bitter recluse. Sophia claimed she was a walking embarrassment to the family name. But I always knew the actual truth. They did not hate Gloria because she was a recluse. They hated her because she was entirely immune to their psychological manipulation. Gloria never asked for money. She never played the victim. When we spoke on the phone, usually on my birthday or major holidays, she never interrogated me about my promotions or my corporate salary. She only asked if I was sleeping enough and if I was eating real food. Lying in the hospital, I realized that she had been quietly watching the slow, agonizing destruction of my life from the sidelines. She had been observing the predators systematically drain their prey. And then I remembered a very specific, incredibly strange phone call from exactly 6 months ago. It was late on a Tuesday evening. Exhausted and reviewing a quarterly corporate report, I answered my personal cell phone. She did not bother with pleasantries or useless small talk. "Lucy, I need you to send me every single bank statement and tax return you have filed for the last 7 years. She had set her voice completely flat and serious over the line. Assuming she needed a reference for her own accounting, I asked her why. She gave a vague, dismissive answer. "I just need to review your tax codes." "Lucy, I think you are missing some vital deductions." Humor, an old lawyer. I was simply too tired to argue. Downloading the massive PDF files, I securely emailed them to her private server. I never heard back about those specific tax deductions. I forgot about the exchange entirely, but putting the pieces together now, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Gloria was not checking for missed tax deductions. She was a former corporate litigator who specialized in forensic accounting. Tracking the parasitic flow of my wealth into Noah and Sophia's endless void was her actual objective. She was building a weapon. The piercing beep of the heart monitor brought me forcefully back to the night my body finally surrendered. It was 11 o'clock on a violently rainy Thursday evening in downtown Chicago. The wind howled aggressively against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my overpriced apartment, but the chill settling inside my chest was significantly colder. Sitting alone at my dark kitchen island, I stared blankly at a complex financial spreadsheet for a failing tech company, my vision blurring heavily at the edges. My chest felt incredibly tight, like a thick steel band was being slowly and purposefully ratcheted around my ribcage. Assuming it was just the excessive caffeine intake and the chronic lack of restorative sleep, I rubbed my sternum repeatedly and promised myself I would rest on Sunday. Then, the screen of my cellular device lit up, cutting sharply through the dim room. A text message from Mackenzie. My stomach immediately dropped into a cold, familiar pit of dread. I did not want to open the message. I knew exactly what it meant before reading a single word. Lucy. Emergency. Need $15,000 wired immediately. Staring at the aggressive, entitled demand, I noted the absence of a polite greeting. There was no question about how my demanding work week was going. It was just a ruthless demand for a massive sum of capital. Picking up the phone, my fingers trembled slightly against the glass as I typed a quick, defensive response. "I cannot do that, Mackenzie. That is my entire emergency savings fund. I have absolutely nothing else to give." Her reply came through less than 10 seconds later, a relentless barrage of digital manipulation. Are you literally kidding me right now? It is a non-refundable deposit for a new franchise opportunity. If I do not wire the funds by tomorrow morning, I lose the deal. I will have no income. My landlord is already threatening eviction. Closing my eyes, I pressed my forehead against the cool marble of the kitchen counter. I knew she was blatantly lying about the eviction notice. I knew the franchise opportunity was likely another superficial scam designed solely to boost her social media presence. But then my screen chimed again. It was a photograph. Mackenzie had sent a picture of Ruby fast asleep in her small bed, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal. The caption underneath the image was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Do you really want your niece to be sleeping in a homeless shelter next week, Lucy? Be a decent sister for once in your miserable life. The guilt hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The golden child's chain yanked violently at my throat. If Mackenzie lost her apartment, Ruby would inevitably suffer. Ruby would be the one dragged through the terrifying chaos of an eviction. I could not protect her from her mother's incompetence, but I could temporarily buy her a safe place to sleep. My breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. The steel band around my chest tightened another terrifying notch. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, blindly reaching for my phone. I was entirely consumed by the desperate need to resolve the manufactured crisis and make the terrifying pressure stop. I opened the banking application. My vision tunneled heavily as the familiar interface of the banking portal loaded on my glowing screen. The checking account hovered dangerously, near zero, completely decimated by the routine first-of-the-month transfers to Noah, Sophia, and Colton. The only remaining capital I possessed was securely locked in my high-yield savings account. It was exactly $15,000. I had meticulously saved it over 2 grueling years, intending it to be a reliable safety net if I ever collapsed and lost my demanding corporate job. It was my only remaining financial lifeline. My fingers hovered hesitantly over the digital keyboard. My left arm suddenly felt incredibly heavy, as if I were desperately trying to move it through wet-setting cement. A sharp, searing pain shot violently up the left side of my jaw. I foolishly ignored it. I was so deeply conditioned to ignore my own physical suffering in service of their constant needs. Navigating slowly to the transfer page, I entered the details. Recipient Mackenzie Hayes. Amount $15,000. The banking system asked for a final confirmation, flashing a bright yellow warning that this transfer would severely deplete my total cash reserves. Looking at the photograph of sleeping Ruby one last time, I let her innocent face justify the financial suicide. I convinced myself I was doing the noble, necessary thing to protect her. I pressed the green confirmation button. The transaction processed instantly. The screen refreshed immediately, showing my savings account balance dropping down to $12.50. I had given them absolutely everything I had left to give. Dropping the cellular device onto the marble counter, it landed with a loud, hollow clack that echoed in the empty kitchen. I tried to take a deep, stabilizing breath, expecting the familiar rush of psychological relief that usually followed my financial compliance. The relief never came. Instead, the steel band around my chest snapped violently tight, cutting off my air supply. The dull ache exploded into an agonizing, crushing pressure, radiating outward from my sternum and shooting down both of my arms. Gasping desperately for air, my lungs completely refused to expand. The world tilted violently on its axis, spinning out of control. Trying to stand up to reach the front door of my apartment and call for help, my legs completely gave out beneath me. I crashed hard onto the polished hardwood floor, my vision dissolving into a swirling sea of gray and black spots. The physical pain was absolute and blinding. I remember dragging my heavy body across the floorboards, desperately reaching for the brass door handle. The terrifying sound of my own ragged, desperate breathing echoed in the empty hallway. By a stroke of absolute luck, my neighbor was returning from a late shift and found me collapsed, motionless in the corridor. I vaguely remember the chaotic shouting, the frantic pressure of hands on my chest, and the blinding red and blue lights flashing aggressively through the lobby windows. The shrill, deafening wail of the ambulance siren was the very last thing that registered in my fading consciousness. I had literally worked myself to the point of complete cardiac failure just to fund a lifestyle I would never get to enjoy. Everything faded into absolute black. When I finally regained consciousness in the intensive care unit 3 agonizing days later, my mind was fractured and hazy. The harsh fluorescent hospital lights burned my retinas aggressively, and the sterile chemical smell of the ward made me violently nauseous. Trapped in a terrifying labyrinth of clear plastic tubing and loudly beeping machinery, I watched the medical team stand solemnly at the foot of my bed. Their faces were grim and sympathetic as they carefully explained the sheer severity of my stress-induced cardiac event. They explicitly told me I was incredibly lucky to be breathing on my own. They also gently informed me that they had repeatedly contacted my emergency medical proxies, Noah and Sophia. The administration had left multiple, urgent, detailed voicemails regarding my critical condition. For the first 48 hours, I stared blankly at the white acoustic ceiling tiles, trapped in a naive, desperate cycle of irrational hope. I kept blindly telling myself they were simply rushing to catch a flight. I rationalized that they were stuck in terrible transit, rushing from their comfortable suburban home to the downtown Chicago hospital to sit vigil by my bedside, imagining Sophia bursting through the swinging double doors. I pictured her finally realizing that she had pushed her eldest daughter entirely too far. I imagined Noah holding my bruised, needle-marked hand, offering a genuine, tearful apology for the immense financial pressure he had ruthlessly placed on my shoulders. Desperately wanting to believe that facing my actual, tangible mortality would somehow snap them permanently out of their endless narcissism, I clung to a pathetic, childish fantasy. When the night nurse finally handed me my fully charged cellular device, the brutal reality shattered my delusions permanently. There were absolutely no frantic text messages asking if I was alive or dead. There were only 74 unread notifications angrily demanding to know why my financial well had suddenly dried up. And then the ultimate unforgivable betrayal. The photograph of the luxury yacht in Florida. The crystal champagne flutes clinking in the sun. The incredibly cruel caption celebrating a beautiful family day, entirely free of my corporate drama. They had known exactly where I was. Aware that I was lying in a hospital bed physically fighting for my life, they had actively chosen to use my freshly transferred $15,000 to rent a luxury boat. The realization did not bring a flood of hysterical tears. It brought a profound, freezing clarity that settled deep into my bones. For 7 exhausting years, I had been desperately purchasing their conditional affection, paying a massive, non-negotiable monthly subscription fee for the pathetic illusion of a loving family. My subscription was immediately and ruthlessly canceled the exact second the payments encountered a minor delay. I was not a beloved daughter. I was not a cherished sister. As a piece of vital financial infrastructure that had temporarily malfunctioned, my failing heart muscle was irrelevant to them. They were only concerned about the sudden malfunction of their personal ATM. Slowly placing the heavy phone face down on the small rolling tray next to my bed, the chaotic noise of my past life faded away. It was replaced completely by the rhythmic hum of the medical equipment, keeping me alive. The heavy door swung open. I fully expected to see a tired nurse carrying another tray of intravenous antibiotics, or a stern doctor arriving to deliver more grim news about the permanent damage to my heart muscle. Instead, the heavy wooden door to the intensive care unit pushed open to reveal a figure I had not seen in person for 3 entire years. Aunt Gloria stood firmly in the doorway. Looking exactly as she always had, she radiated an aura of absolute uncompromising authority. Her thick silver hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant twist. Wearing a tailored black trench coat over a simple dark wool sweater, she looked completely out of place in the sterile, brightly lit medical environment. She was holding a battered black leather briefcase tightly in her right hand. Gloria did not rush to my bedside. She did not gasp in theatrical horror at the myriad of tubes snaking out of my bruised arms, nor did she offer any empty, tearful platitudes about how terribly worried she was. Slowly walking into the room, her sensible leather boots clicked methodically against the linoleum floor. She pulled the uncomfortable plastic visitor's chair directly to the edge of my mattress. The plastic legs scraped loudly against the floorboards. Sitting down, she crossed her legs carefully and fixed her piercing gray eyes directly on my pale, exhausted face. "You look absolutely terrible, Lucy," she said quietly. Her voice was rough like gravel grinding against hard stone, completely devoid of any useless pity. Letting out a dry, rattling breath, I felt the deep ache in my chest. They went to Florida, Aunt Gloria. They took my emergency savings fund and rented a luxury yacht while the doctors were restarting my heart. Gloria did not look even mildly surprised. Her stern expression barely shifted. "I am fully aware of exactly where they are, child. I have been tracking their financial movements for months. She placed the heavy leather briefcase securely on her lap and flipped the dual metal latches open. The sharp mechanical click echoed loudly in the quiet room. I warned you 6 months ago that your blind loyalty would eventually kill you. You cannot audit genuine love, Lucy. But you can absolutely audit a parasitic infection. Staring at her, my exhausted mind struggled to properly process her sudden presence. "Why are you here now?" I whispered, my dry throat burning with the effort of speaking. Gloria reached into the briefcase and pulled a sleek silver laptop from its depths. Setting it firmly on the rolling hospital tray table, she aggressively pushed my silent cellular device out of the way. She opened the screen, the bright white light illuminating the deep, distinguished lines around her mouth. She looked at me, her eyes flashing with a cold, fiercely protective fury. "I am here because you have finally paid your imaginary debt to those leeches. You have paid them with your youth, your sanity, and almost your physical life. The bank is now permanently closed." Turning the glowing laptop screen toward my bed, she prepared the final blow. The real audit had begun. The spreadsheet on Gloria's glowing screen was incredibly massive, spanning hundreds of meticulously categorized rows and columns. It was a complete, horrifying chronological record of every single financial transaction I had initiated for Noah, Sophia, Mackenzie, and Colton over the last 7 turbulent years. Gloria did not ask for my permission to begin. She simply started reading the cold, hard data aloud in the sterile quiet of the hospital room. Her voice was incredibly steady, presenting the devastating facts like a seasoned prosecutor laying out evidence before a silent jury. Year 1, she stated, her finger tracing the digital line. $48,000 allocated to Noah and Sophia for mortgage payments. $12,000 to Mackenzie for introductory rent assistance. Total $60,000. I flinched physically, the numbers hitting me like a succession of sharp slaps to the face. When you make the transfers incrementally on the 1st and the 15th of the month, you easily blind yourself to the actual volume of the hemorrhaging capital. Year 3, Gloria continued, completely ignoring my visible discomfort. $48,000 for the mortgage, $42,000 for Mackenzie's upgraded loft, $10,000 for Sophia's country club initiation fees and auxiliary social events. Total $100,000. My breathing hitched. $100,000 in a single year. I was eating expired yogurt and working 80-hour weeks while they were literally drinking my lifeblood at private luncheons. Year 5. Colton enters the equation, Gloria said, her tone dropping in temperature. $50,000 wired directly into an unregulated cryptocurrency exchange. $48,000 for the mortgage. $42,000 for the loft. Total, $140,000. She methodically went through every single year, highlighting the luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobe upgrades, and the endless stream of spontaneous vacations they labeled as necessary self-care. The total sum was utterly staggering. By the time she reached the current year, including the $15,000 transfer that had directly triggered my cardiac collapse, the final calculation sat in bold red text at the bottom of the spreadsheet. $456,000. Almost $500,000. Staring at the bold red number, my vision blurred with fresh tears. It was not just money. That number represented missed vacations I never took. It represented the secure home I never purchased for myself. It represented the severe, crippling anxiety that kept me awake every single night. Constantly terrified of missing a corporate deadline, I thought I was keeping them afloat. I whispered defensively, the remnants of my golden child programming, desperately trying to justify the catastrophic loss. Gloria snapped the silver laptop shut with a loud, definitive crack. Leaning forward, her gray eyes locked onto mine with absolute, unwavering certainty. Help is throwing a life preserver to a drowning person, Lucy. You were systematically cutting out your own lungs and handing them over so they could breathe easier on a luxury yacht. The brutal truth finally settled into my bones. It was all just smoke. I stared at the glowing red number on Gloria's laptop screen for a very long time. $456,000. It was the exact calculated price of my indentured servitude. Gloria did not rush me. She sat perfectly still in the uncomfortable plastic visitor chair, watching my face carefully, waiting for the profound realization to completely settle into my exhausted bones. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I assessed the damage. The sharp, residual pain in my chest was still there. a lingering physical reminder of the breaking point they had mercilessly pushed me toward, but the crushing, suffocating weight of my lifelong guilt was entirely gone. Reaching out with my bruised, heavy left hand, the IV line pulled slightly against my pale skin. "Let me have the computer," I whispered, my voice raspy from days of disuse but surprisingly steady. Gloria nodded slowly, her piercing gray eyes flashing with a distinct look of approval. Pushing the sleek silver laptop across the rolling hospital tray toward me, she yielded control. I rested my trembling fingers on the cold trackpad. Navigating away from the forensic accounting spreadsheet, I logged directly into my primary banking portal. Moving through the menus, I clicked on the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was, the automated machinery of my own destruction, neatly organized into repeating monthly withdrawals laid out in simple black and white. Hovering the digital cursor over the very first line item, I read the details. Recipient Noah Hayes. Amount $4,000. Frequency, the first of every single month. Purpose mortgage. For 7 long, agonizing years, hitting that specific button had felt like a sacred, unbreakable duty. Now it felt like an absolute parasitic drain on my life. I clicked the red delete icon. A small gray confirmation box popped up on the center of the screen, asking if I was entirely sure I wanted to cancel this recurring payment. "I am absolutely sure," I murmured to the quiet, empty room. I clicked confirm. The line item instantly vanished into the digital void. A strange, incredibly powerful jolt of electricity shot straight through my spine. It felt undeniably liberating. Moving down to the second line, I prepared the next strike. Recipient, Mackenzie Hayes. Amount $3,500. Frequency the first of every single month. Purpose rent. I thought about the luxury yacht photo. I thought about little Ruby asking if I was making up drama to ruin their vacation. I clicked delete. I clicked confirm. Gone. Next was Colton. $500 every week for his basic living allowance, heavily subsidized by my 80-hour work weeks. Delete. Confirm. Gone. Systematically going through every single automated payment, I erased a decade of deeply ingrained financial abuse in less than 3 minutes. When I finally reached the bottom of the page, the screen was completely blank. A simple, beautiful message appeared. "You currently have no scheduled transfers." Leaning back against the stiff hospital pillows, I felt exhausted, but remarkably clear-headed. Picking up my cellular device, I opened my applications and methodically blocked Noah, Sophia, Mackenzie, and Colton everywhere. Gloria watched me build the fortress. "The first cut is the deepest," she said quietly. "The rest is just necessary cleanup." I nodded slowly, staring at my locked phone. Tomorrow is the first of the month. If you've ever had to press delete on a toxic family member, drop a 1 in the comments. Let's stand together. The storm was coming. The next 48 hours in the intensive care unit felt like a bizarre, suspended reality. I was physically weak, entirely restricted to my hospital bed, and constantly monitored by a team of rotating cardiologists who seemed perpetually concerned about my heart rhythm. But internally, I felt significantly lighter than I had in a decade. Gloria practically moved into the room with me, setting up a makeshift corporate office on the small visitor table. She typed aggressively on her silver laptop and completely ignored the nurse's mild protests about strict visiting hours. We did not talk much. We were simply waiting. We both knew exactly what day was approaching. It was Thursday, the first of the month. It was the specific day the financial pipelines were supposed to flood their accounts with fresh capital. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, Gloria walked back into my room holding 2 steaming cups of actual dark roast coffee from a local cafe, completely bypassing the terrible hospital cafeteria mud. Handing me a warm cup, she sat down in her plastic chair. "Are you ready for the fallout?" she asked, her voice calm and remarkably steady. Taking a slow sip of the hot coffee, I let the caffeine hit my system. "I am completely ready," I replied. We placed my cellular device in the center of the rolling tray table. I had left it powered on, but the volume was turned all the way up and the screen was facing the bright ceiling. At precisely 9:15, the glass screen lit up violently. The device began to vibrate against the plastic tray with an angry, aggressive energy. Mackenzie. Watching the incoming call screen flash brightly illuminating the dim room, I felt a deep sense of calm. I did not reach for it. I did not flinch. I just watched it ring continuously until it finally rolled over to the automated voicemail system. Less than 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. Noah, then Sophia, then Colton. It was a completely coordinated, frantic assault. The digital storm had officially arrived. They were not calling to check on my failing heart muscle. They were not calling because they suddenly felt a profound remorse for abandoning me in a medical crisis to drink champagne in Florida. Calling because their debit cards were being aggressively declined at luxury boutiques and expensive brunch restaurants across the coastline. They were acting purely on self-interest. They were calling because the dependable corporate machine had suddenly stopped printing their money. The phone buzzed nonstop for 20 solid minutes. It was a terrifying wall of red missed calls and frantic text messages. Gloria leaned over and tapped the screen, opening the message preview without unlocking the device. "Lucy, why is the mortgage transfer delayed? Call the bank right now." That was from Noah. "My card just bounced at the salon. You are literally ruining my life. Fix this immediately." That was from Mackenzie. There was zero empathy, zero concern for my physical survival. Staring at the aggressive words I felt, the last remaining shreds of my misplaced loyalty completely evaporate. If there had been even a tiny fraction of a doubt left, their reaction completely erased it. The machine was permanently broken. The relentless buzzing of the cellular device finally paused, leaving the hospital room in a tense, vibrating silence. Staring at the blank screen, my jaw tight and my hands resting flat against the thin hospital blanket, I braced myself. I truly thought the absolute worst of their betrayal was the simple fact that they felt incredibly entitled to my corporate salary. I believed their greed was their primary sin. I was completely wrong. The financial abuse was significantly deeper and much more sinister than basic entitlement. Gloria slowly reached into her black leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Placing it squarely on my lap, her expression grew grim. "You need to see exactly what you have been funding, Lucy," she said quietly. "You thought you were keeping a roof over Noah and Sophia's heads. You thought you were preventing them from losing the suburban house you grew up in." Looking down at the heavy folder, I felt a knot form in my stomach. "I was paying a $4,000 mortgage every single month," I said, my voice defensive and slightly confused. Gloria shook her head, her gray eyes filled with a cold, hard pity that made my stomach churn. "Open the file, Lucy." Flipping the heavy cover open, I examined the first document. It was a certified property deed stamped by the county clerk's office. It was the official deed to my parents' house in the Chicago suburbs. Scanning the legal text, my eyes jumped immediately to the critical section regarding active liens and outstanding debts. The section was completely blank. Frowning, I desperately tried to process the information. "This legally says the house is fully paid off," I murmured. "When did they do this?" Gloria tapped the date on the top corner of the legal document with her manicured fingernail. 4 years ago, they used an unexpected inheritance from Noah's uncle to quietly clear the remaining mortgage balance. They have not owed the banking institution a single dollar for that property in 48 months. The air violently left my lungs. If the suburban house was fully paid off 4 years ago, where was my $4,000 going every single month? Gloria flipped to the second page in the folder. It was another property deed. This one from a high-end real estate agency in coastal Florida. Detailed within was the recent purchase of a luxury oceanfront condominium. The monthly installment payment was exactly $4,000. The primary owners listed securely on the deed were Noah and Sophia Hayes. My hands began to shake violently against the papers. I was not keeping them off the harsh streets. I was entirely financing their secret vacation property, systematically lying to my face. They had skillfully weaponized my deep fear of their homelessness to extract a luxury lifestyle. They had watched me eat expired food and work myself into a cardiac unit, completely aware that my immense sacrifice was strictly funding their ocean views. If you have ever discovered a family member lying directly to your face about money, drop a 1 in the comments. Let's stand together because the betrayal is a uniquely suffocating pain. I dropped the heavy papers onto the blanket. They were calculated predators. I closed my eyes tightly. Keeping my eyes tightly closed, I tried to completely block out the harsh fluorescent lighting of the intensive care unit. The devastating revelation about the luxury Florida condominium felt like a massive physical blow to my already damaged chest. The people who were supposedly my family, the people who were supposed to protect me, had actively and systematically plotted to drain my resources for their own superficial pleasure. How long have you known about this? I asked Gloria, my voice barely a raspy whisper echoing in the quiet room. Opening my eyes, I looked directly at my aunt. She was calmly organizing the legal documents back into her black briefcase, utterly unfazed by the emotional wreckage. I started aggressively investigating their financial footprint about a year ago, Gloria admitted smoothly. Sophia made a foolish, arrogant comment at a holiday dinner about their beautiful new winter views. She tried to backtrack immediately, but I spent decades dismantling corporate frauds for a living. I know exactly what a desperate cover-up looks like. Pausing, Gloria rested her hands flat on the small tray table. That is precisely why I called you 6 months ago and demanded your banking statements under the guise of helping with your tax deductions. I needed absolute, undeniable proof of the cash flow. You should have told me, I said. A brief flash of misplaced anger rising in my throat. I was practically killing myself for them. Gloria did not flinch at my accusatory tone. If I had told you 6 months ago, Lucy, you would not have believed me. You were still entirely trapped in the golden child syndrome. Confronting Noah would have allowed him to expertly manipulate the situation, play the desperate victim, and you would have ultimately forgiven them. You had to physically break before you could psychologically see the truth. She was absolutely right. The realization was incredibly bitter, but undeniably accurate. If she had presented this evidence last year, I would have desperately searched for a reason to justify their horrific actions. So what happens now? I asked, looking down at the silent cellular device. They are going to realize the money is permanently gone. They will not just accept this quietly. Noah will inevitably try to sue me for support. Mackenzie will try to destroy my professional reputation online. Gloria offered a thin, incredibly dangerous smile. It was the smile of a seasoned predator who had already cornered its prey. They cannot sue you for money you no longer legally possess, she stated calmly. Reaching into her briefcase one final time, she pulled out a sleek blue leather folder. It looked entirely different from the property deeds. It looked heavy, official, and terrifyingly permanent. Placing it gently on my hospital bed right over my legs, she prepared her defense. They are going to try to attack you, Gloria said, her voice dropping to a low, serious register. But I have been preparing for this exact moment since the day I reviewed your banking statements. I built you a shield. Staring cautiously at the blue leather folder resting on my thin hospital blanket, I read the gold lettering embossed on the front cover, the Hayes Irrevocable Trust. I looked up at Gloria, completely confused by the complex legal terminology and the sudden shift in strategy. What exactly is this? I asked my fingers, gently tracing the cold gold lettering. Gloria leaned forward entirely, entering her element as a master legal strategist. It is a highly specialized financial vehicle, Lucy. When I realized the sheer depth of their deception 6 months ago, I knew simply cutting off their allowance would not be enough. They would aggressively retaliate, attempting to claim you owed them for your upbringing, or trying to legally attach themselves to your assets. They would stop at nothing. Opening the heavy folder, Gloria revealed dozens of pages of dense legal framework, already formally notarized and officially filed with the state. This is an irrevocable trust. Unlike a standard bank account or a revocable living trust, once assets are safely transferred into an irrevocable trust, they fundamentally cease to belong to you. Legally speaking, you do not own them anymore. The trust owns them. Reading the summary page, my exhausted brain struggled to fully comprehend the magnitude of her actions. If I do not own my money, who does? I asked. The trust does, Gloria repeated firmly. You are the designated beneficiary, meaning the funds can be used for your care and maintenance. But I am the legal trustee. I control the distribution. I filed the paperwork and transferred your remaining liquid assets, your robust retirement portfolio, and your corporate investments into this entity 3 days ago, the exact moment you were admitted to the intensive care unit. Sitting back against the pillows, the sheer brilliance of the legal maneuver slowly washed over me. It was the ultimate financial defense system, so if Noah tries to sue me for financial support, I started. He will be suing a woman who legally has zero net worth. Gloria finished my sentence smoothly. You cannot bleed a stone, Lucy. Furthermore, because it is irrevocable, even if they somehow manage to coerce you into signing a document demanding the funds, you literally do not have the legal authority to withdraw the money. Only I do, and I will absolutely never approve a transfer to those parasites. Gloria had not just closed my bank account. She had securely locked my entire life inside an impenetrable, fireproof legal vault, and she had swallowed the only key. Looking at the legal shield resting on my lap, I felt the heavy metal band around my chest finally loosen its grip. The anxiety that had plagued me for 7 years began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of security. They could scream, they could threaten, but they could not touch me. The realization that I was finally protected, not by emotional pleas or desperate arguments, but by the cold, hard reality of corporate law, was the most comforting feeling I had ever experienced. "They will not understand this at first," Gloria warned softly. "When the credit cards bounce, the leeches will actively start looking for the main artery." I was completely untouchable now. The next 2 days in the intensive care unit were an exercise in profound patience. Physically tethered to the medical monitors, my body slowly repaired the severe damage inflicted by years of chronic exhaustion. But the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. It no longer felt like a clinical prison. It felt exactly like a fortified bunker. Gloria sat in the plastic visitor chair near the window, quietly completing complex crossword puzzles and sipping dark roast coffee. We had established a comfortable, unspoken rhythm. Today was the 3rd of the month. The financial pipelines were fully severed, and the initial shock of the declined credit cards had clearly evolved into a state of absolute frantic desperation. My cellular device sat face up on the rolling tray table, having vibrated almost continuously for 48 hours. The red notification bubble hovering over the phone application currently read 152 missed calls. Noah and Sophia had apparently abandoned their luxury Florida vacation early, realizing that yelling at bank tellers over the phone was not resolving their sudden lack of liquid capital. The aggressive text messages had shifted from angry demands to thinly veiled threats. "Lucy, you are destroying this family. Call me immediately," Noah wrote. "I am going to lose my apartment today. You are a monster," Mackenzie texted. Reading the messages in silence, I felt absolutely zero urge to reply. The Golden Child programming was completely dead. "They are running out of options," Gloria noted calmly, not looking up from her newspaper. "When parasites cannot locate the primary host, they become incredibly erratic. They will try to find a new angle of attack." Nodding slowly, I took a small sip of ice water. I knew they would not simply accept the closed bank accounts and quietly move on with their lives. They possessed a staggering sense of entitlement to my hard-earned corporate salary. They genuinely believed my money was their fundamental birthright. Adjusting the hospital blankets over my lap, I felt the slight weight of the blue leather trust folder resting securely underneath. Before I tell you exactly how they tried to permanently steal my autonomy, I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever known someone who felt entirely entitled to your hard work? Drop a comment below and share your experience. If this resonates, keep watching because the ultimate confrontation was just beginning. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy wooden doors at the end of the intensive care hallway swung open with a loud, aggressive bang. Hearing the rapid, heavy footsteps marching down the corridor, I knew they were completely ignoring the nurse's frantic demands to observe the quiet hours. The waiting was finally over. The heavy door to my hospital room was shoved open so violently that the metal handle struck the interior drywall with a loud, echoing crack. Noah, Sophia, and Mackenzie marched aggressively into the confined space, instantly sucking all the breathable oxygen out of the room. They looked absolutely ridiculous. Dressed in pristine, brightly colored resort wear, they sported fresh, glowing Florida tans that contrasted sharply with the bleak, sterile reality of the intensive care unit. The overpowering smell of coconut sunscreen and expensive designer perfume immediately flooded my senses momentarily, making me feel nauseous. They did not stop at the foot of the bed. Crowding directly around me, their faces twisted into identical masks of furious indignation. Not a single one of them glanced at the complex heart monitors tracking my fragile pulse. Nobody looked at the dark, purple bruising covering both of my arms from the intravenous lines. "What kind of sick, twisted game are you playing, Lucy?" Sophia hissed, her voice vibrating with a theatrical, highly manufactured rage. She clutched a massive designer handbag tightly to her chest. "Do you have any idea how completely humiliated we were?" Noah's platinum card was loudly declined at the Marina Clubhouse. In front of the entire board of directors, you intentionally humiliated your own family. Staring at her, I kept my facial expression completely blank. I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to defend myself. I simply looked at the deep tan lines on her shoulders, paid for entirely by my emergency savings fund, while I was actively flatlining in Chicago. I did not humiliate you, Sophia, I said quietly, my voice raspy but incredibly steady. Your empty bank account humiliated you. Noah stepped forward, his face flushing, a dangerous shade of crimson. Pointing a thick, accusatory finger directly at my face, he launched his attack. You listen to me right now. I do not know what kind of childish tantrum you are throwing, but you will open that laptop and you will wire the mortgage payment immediately. We are not going to lose our home because you decided to have a mental breakdown. It was breathtaking, the absolute unyielding audacity. He was standing in a cardiac ward demanding, I fund the secret Florida condominium, while continuing to call it their suburban home. Gloria remained perfectly still in the corner shadow, watching the chaotic performance with the cold, analytical eyes of a seasoned litigator evaluating a hostile witness. She did not intervene. She wanted me to hear every single word. She wanted me to fully absorb the absolute absence of their humanity. The real monsters had arrived. When Noah's aggressive demands failed to provoke the tearful, submissive apology they were all eagerly expecting, Mackenzie aggressively pushed her way to the front. Looking immaculate, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup completely flawless, she presented a stark contrast to my hospital gown. She was holding a brand new cellular device undoubtedly purchased with the very last transfer I had sent her before my collapse. Glaring down at me, her eyes narrowed with a vicious, calculating cruelty. She knew exactly which emotional buttons to press. Having spent her entire life studying my vulnerabilities, she prepared her strike. You think you are being so incredibly strong right now, Lucy Mackenzie sneered, crossing her arms over her chest. You think cutting off my rent money makes you some kind of powerful hero? You are just a bitter, lonely woman who is jealous of my life, maintaining my silence. I refused to give her the satisfying reaction she was desperately baiting. The lack of response only infuriated her further. Leaning closer, invading my physical space, her voice dropped to a low, venomous whisper. If you do not fix my bank account today, Lucy, you will never see Ruby again. The sterile room seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees in temperature. My heart monitor gave a slight rapid flutter, the very first visual sign of my internal distress. I will absolutely block your number on her iPad, Mackenzie continued, a triumphant, cruel smile spreading across her perfectly painted lips. I will tell her that her aunt does not love her anymore. I will tell her you abandoned us. You will not be invited to her birthdays, her school recitals, nothing. You will be entirely dead to her. Is your stupid, petty financial tantrum really worth losing? The only kid who actually tolerates you? It was the lowest, most despicable tactic possible. She was openly weaponizing a 7-year-old child to extort a $15,000 luxury loft payment. Treating her own biological daughter like a bargaining chip in a cheap hostage negotiation, she revealed her true nature. Have you ever seen someone use a child as a financial weapon? Let me know in the comments, because what happened next is exactly what they deserved for crossing that sacred line. A week ago, that specific threat would have shattered my resolve entirely. I would have panicked, apologized profusely, and frantically opened my banking application to secure my access to Ruby. But today, sitting in the secure fortress Gloria had built, I felt a different kind of energy. I felt a cold, righteous anger. Looking directly into Mackenzie's eyes, I delivered my verdict. You do not deserve that little girl, I stated simply. Mackenzie scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. Deserve her or not, I am her mother. I hold all the cards, Lucy. She had crossed the line. Noah clearly sensed that Mackenzie's emotional extortion was not producing the immediate financial results they required. Aggressively shoving his way back to the side of the hospital bed, his face became a mask of determined, ruthless authority. Enough of this useless talking, Noah barked, his voice booming loudly in the confined medical space. Turning toward the open doorway, he snapped his fingers. Get in here! Now! A man nervously shuffled into the room. Wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and carrying a battered leather briefcase, he looked incredibly uncomfortable, sweating profusely under the harsh hospital lighting. He actively avoided making direct eye contact with me, staring instead at the linoleum floor. Noah snatched a piece of official-looking paper from the nervous man's hands and slammed it aggressively onto my tray table. This, Noah announced, tapping the paper with heavy emphasis, is a medical evaluation signed by a private physician we retained. It officially states that your recent cardiac event resulted in a severe lack of oxygen to your brain, causing significant cognitive decline and erratic paranoid behavior. My eyes widened slightly in sheer disbelief. Staring at the fraudulent document, the reality of their plot sank in. They were actively attempting to build a medical narrative that I had lost my mind. And this, Noah continued, pulling a second, thicker document from the cheap lawyer's briefcase, is a petition for emergency conservatorship. It grants Sophia and me total immediate control over all of your financial assets, your medical decisions, and your corporate properties. The absolute audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. Because I had finally refused to voluntarily hand them my paycheck, they had hired a strip mall attorney to legally steal my autonomy, declaring me mentally unfit. They intended to permanently hijack my life. You have two very simple choices today, Lucy Sophia added, her voice dripping with fake, sickening sweetness. You can voluntarily sign this durable power of attorney granting us access to the accounts so we can pay the bills and take care of you properly. Or we walk this petition straight into a judge's chambers this afternoon and we take control anyway. And if we have to go to court, we will make sure everyone in your prestigious corporate firm knows exactly how unstable you have become. Standing there, forming a menacing wall around my bed, they fully expected me to crumble into a sobbing, defeated mess. Firmly believing they held a royal flush, they thought their trap was flawless. They believed they had effectively cornered the golden child for the very last time. They thought they had won. The tense silence in the room was suddenly broken by the sound of a slow, deliberate handclap. Everyone turned. Gloria stood up from her chair in the shadowed corner of the room, stepping fully into the bright fluorescent light, her tailored trench coat completely unwrinkled. Her posture radiated absolute terrifying power. That is quite a fascinating legal strategy, Noah Gloria said, her gravelly voice echoing with cold amusement. Although, utilizing a fraudulent medical document to secure a conservatorship is technically a Class 3 felony in this state. The cheap lawyer in the gray suit instantly turned a pale shade of green. He took a very distinct step backward toward the heavy wooden door. Noah puffed out his chest, attempting to maintain his false bravado. Stay out of this, Gloria. This is a private family matter. Lucy is clearly suffering from a mental breakdown, and we are stepping in to protect her assets. Gloria did not raise her voice. Simply walking over to the side of my bed, she picked up the fraudulent medical evaluation. She glanced at the signature and laughed softly. Dr. Eris. He lost his medical license 2 years ago for writing fraudulent prescriptions. Not exactly a stellar expert witness for your grand petition, casually dropping the fake evaluation into the trash can next to the bed. Gloria executed her counterattack. Reaching onto my lap, she picked up the heavy blue leather folder. You see, Noah, your entire extortion plot has one massive fatal flaw. Opening the blue folder, she extracted a beautifully notarized document. She held it up so the sweating lawyer could clearly read the bold text. I hold the legally binding, fully executed, durable power of attorney for Lucy Hayes. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized 6 months ago, long before any alleged medical event. I am her sole medical and financial proxy. Your petition is entirely void. Sophia gasped her hand, flying dramatically to her chest. You cannot do that. We are her parents, and it gets significantly worse for you, Gloria continued, smoothly ignoring Sophia completely. She pulled out the second stack of papers. This is the Hayes Irrevocable Trust. As of 3 days ago, Lucy possesses absolutely zero personal assets. No bank accounts, no corporate portfolios, nothing. The trust owns everything, and I am the sole unyielding trustee. Taking a deliberate step closer to Noah, her gray eyes locked onto his with predatory focus. You cannot place a conservatorship on a woman who has no money, Noah. You are attempting to legally hijack an empty box. The legal trap snapped shut. The cheap lawyer in the gray suit did not need to hear another word. The sheer mention of an irrevocable trust and a pre-existing durable power of attorney instantly triggered his basic survival instincts. Looking at Gloria, he recognized the unmistakable, ruthless posture of a seasoned corporate litigator and actively panicked. I was heavily misinformed about the circumstances of this case, the lawyer stammered quickly, nervously backing out of the intensive care room. I withdraw my representation immediately. Good day. Practically sprinting down the hospital corridor, the heavy door swung shut behind him. Noah stood frozen in place, his face rapidly draining of all color. The grand, intimidating illusion of his authority had been completely shattered in less than 60 seconds. Opening his mouth to argue, no coherent words came out. He was a small, pathetic man who had just realized his primary ATM was permanently encased in solid steel. Sophia began to cry, but it was not her usual manipulative weeping. It was genuine, terrified panic. "Gloria, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "We have multiple massive payments due. We will lose the country club. We will lose everything." Gloria looked at her sister with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "You already own the Florida condominium outright, Sophia. Sell it. Downsize. Get a job. Your days of living a luxury lifestyle funded by your daughter's literal blood are permanently over." Mackenzie, realizing the financial pipeline was truly dead, desperately tried to pivot back to her only remaining weapon. "I meant what I said, Lucy," she shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at the bed. "You will absolutely never see Ruby again. I will take her and—" "You will do absolutely nothing," Gloria interrupted, her voice suddenly cracking like a heavy whip. Reaching into her briefcase, she pulled out one final manila folder. "If you attempt to withhold that child from Lucy, I will immediately forward this comprehensive dossier to Child Protective Services. It details your extensive luxury travel history while abandoning Ruby with unvetted, unlicensed teenage babysitters for weeks at a time. I have the credit card receipts. I will have you investigated for criminal child neglect before the sun sets today." Mackenzie physically recoiled, her mouth snapping shut. The ultimate weapon had been expertly neutralized. They had absolutely no cards left to play, no money, no legal leverage, no child to use as a hostage. Completely exposed standing in their expensive resort wear, they faced the absolute ruin of their parasitic existence. Gloria pointed a steady finger directly at the wooden door. "Leave this hospital immediately. If any of you ever attempt to contact Lucy again, I will personally ensure your fraudulent mortgage application is sent directly to the federal authorities." Noah, Sophia, and Mackenzie turned around in absolute silence. They did not look back at me. Walking out the door with their heads lowered, their false empire was completely destroyed by the precision of a few legal documents. They were completely wiped out. I was officially discharged from the cardiac intensive care unit exactly 3 days after Gloria ruthlessly dismantled their fraudulent conservatorship attempt. The attending cardiologist handed me a thick stack of medical discharge papers, his expression incredibly serious. Outlining a strict recovery regimen, he explicitly banned any stressful corporate activities, late-night flights, or severe emotional distress. My heart muscle was permanently scarred, and it required absolute tranquility to heal properly. Gloria handled all the hospital administration forms, while I slowly changed out of the sterile hospital gown. We did not drive directly to the airport. Gloria drove the rental car straight back to my overpriced minimalist apartment in the heart of downtown Chicago. Walking through my own front door felt like stepping into the perfectly preserved tomb of a complete stranger. The air was incredibly stale, smelling faintly of expensive room spray and completely devoid of any actual life. The sleek glass dining table where I had suffered the massive cardiac event served only as a reminder of the prison I had built. The sprawling walk-in closet filled entirely with strictly tailored, neutral-colored business suits that I wore exclusively to intimidate failing corporate executives held no warmth. I felt absolutely no connection to any of it. Walking into the home office, I booted up my primary work computer and typed a brief 3-sentence resignation email to the managing director of the consulting firm. I did not ask for a leave of absence. I simply stated that Lucy Hayes was permanently stepping away from the corporate sector effective immediately. Closing the laptop, I left it squarely on the desk. 2 medium-sized suitcases were all I needed to erase a decade, meticulously packing 3 pairs of comfortable jeans, 5 soft cotton sweaters, a pair of worn-out sneakers, my personal documents, and a few favorite books. I prepared my exit. I left the expensive designer heels lined up neatly in the closet. I left the luxury watches. I left the expensive espresso machine they had demanded I buy to host their occasional visits, refusing to take a single object that reminded me of the relentless financial machine I used to be. I traveled light. Before walking out the front door, I pulled my cellular device from my pocket, Opening the settings menu, I executed a complete factory reset and systematically wiped the entire memory drive. Removing the tiny SIM card, I snapped the plastic chip cleanly in half and dropped the pieces directly into the metal trash can. I left the empty device sitting silently on the kitchen counter. Picking up my modest luggage, I walked out into the carpeted hallway and locked the door to the apartment for the very last time. Gloria was waiting patiently in the idling car downstairs, the engine humming softly against the cold Chicago wind. Putting my bags in the trunk, I slid into the passenger seat and pulled the seatbelt across my chest. As we merged onto the highway, watching the towering gray skyscrapers of the city slowly shrink in the rearview mirror, I felt the heavy, suffocating atmosphere finally begin to lift. I never looked back. The transition from the aggressive concrete grid of Chicago to the rugged natural beauty of coastal Maine was an absolute shock to my fragile system. Gloria's house was a beautiful, weathered wooden structure, sitting proudly at the very edge of a rocky cliff, overlooking the vast, endless expanse of the freezing Atlantic Ocean. There were no wailing police sirens. There were no aggressive traffic sounds. The only consistent noise was the rhythmic, powerful crashing of the saltwater waves against the dark granite rocks below. For the first 2 weeks, I did practically nothing but sleep. My traumatized body demanded an aggressive amount of restorative rest, keeping me unconscious for 12 to 14 hours a day. When physical recovery finally began, I started exploring the small, tight-knit local community. The town was incredibly quiet, smelling permanently of fresh pine needles and salty sea air. 3 months into my recovery, I noticed a small, abandoned commercial space on the main street overlooking the harbor. Using the funds safely secured inside my irrevocable trust, I signed a commercial lease. I did not open a consulting firm. I opened a small independent bookstore that served exceptionally good dark roast coffee. My new daily uniform consisted of comfortable wool sweaters and sturdy denim jeans. Organizing vintage novels filled my mornings, and steaming milk for the local fishermen and retired artists occupied my afternoons. The chaotic, adrenaline-fueled life of a corporate fixer felt like a distant, hazy nightmare. Occasionally distant rumors about the fallout in Chicago reached me, relayed selectively by Gloria's old legal contacts. Without my $4,000 monthly subsidy, Noah and Sophia had completely defaulted on the secret Florida condominium. The bank foreclosed on the luxury property, and they were publicly expelled from their exclusive country club for failing to pay their accumulating dues. Mackenzie's influencer aesthetic instantly collapsed when she could no longer afford the downtown loft, forcing her to move into a cheap, poorly lit suburban apartment complex. Colton had allegedly taken a minimum wage job at a local hardware store. Hearing about their rapid, inevitable financial destruction did not bring me any profound sense of malicious joy. It simply brought me a cold, logical confirmation. The ultimate revenge against a toxic bloodline is not a dramatic, screaming confrontation in a courtroom. The greatest revenge is simply removing your energy from their ecosystem entirely. My revenge was the smell of old paper and fresh coffee beans. My revenge was the slow, steady, quiet rhythm of my own heart monitor beating perfectly, without the aid of chemical stimulants or panic. My heart finally rested. The profound peace of my new coastal life was interrupted exactly 8 months later by a frantic, unexpected phone call from a Child Protective Services social worker in Illinois. Mackenzie, desperate to maintain her illusion of high society relevance, had officially abandoned a terrified Ruby in a cheap motel room while she flew to a different state to chase a fraudulent internet millionaire. The authorities had stepped in. Because Noah and Sophia were currently facing aggressive legal action from multiple debt collectors and had no stable housing, the social worker had tracked down Gloria's legal contact information. We did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. Activating her formidable legal network in Chicago, Gloria filed emergency custody petitions and leveraged the massive, undeniable pile of evidence regarding Mackenzie's severe negligence. Because I now owned a stable, profitable business, and an appropriate home environment, the family court judge granted me full permanent legal guardianship of my niece within 3 weeks. The day Ruby arrived at the regional airport in Maine, clutching her worn-out stuffed animal and looking incredibly fragile, I pulled her into my arms and promised her she would never have to be a prop in anyone else's drama ever. Again. That night, as I tucked Ruby securely into a warm bed in the guest room of my coastal house, listening to her breathing slowly even out, I sat by the window and watched the lighthouse beams sweep across the dark ocean. If you are watching this and you have ever felt like an outsider in your own family, please listen carefully. If you have been designated as the permanent caretaker, the financial safety net, or the emotional punching bag for people who share your DNA, you need to understand the absolute truth. Loyalty that is aggressively demanded but never softly returned is not love. It is a predatory transaction. You are fundamentally allowed to audit the love in your life. When the emotional and financial mathematics continuously leave you completely bankrupt, you have every right to permanently close the account. Do not wait until your physical body collapses in a sterile corporate boardroom to realize that your life actually belongs to you. Blood simply gives people an introduction to your life. It absolutely does not guarantee them a permanent, undisputed residency in your heart. Walking away from the people who were supposed to protect you is the most terrifying, agonizing process you will ever initiate. It will temporarily feel like you are destroying your own universe, but the profound silence that follows the initial destruction is not an empty void. It is the sacred, fertile space where your actual life finally begins to grow. She was finally safe. The morning sun rises incredibly early over the rocky coastline of Maine, casting long, brilliant ribbons of gold and pale pink across the freezing Atlantic water. It is a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 years since the day I woke up to a screaming heart monitor and 74 aggressive demands for capital. Standing on the weathered wooden porch of my house, I hold a warm, ceramic mug of dark roast coffee. The bitter, complex aroma mixes perfectly with the sharp, clean scent of the saltwater tide. Down on the sandy beach below the cliff, Ruby is wearing a bright yellow raincoat, laughing loudly as she chases an energetic, scruffy rescue dog we adopted last autumn. She is thriving. She has a dedicated tutor, a shelf full of new books, and most importantly, she has a childhood completely free of conditional love and psychological manipulation. Taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, I let the warmth spread entirely through my chest. My cellular device is sitting safely inside the kitchen. It has not vibrated with a single frantic demand, guilt trip, or threatening ultimatum in 24 months. I do not know where Noah, Sophia, Mackenzie, or Colton are currently residing, and for the first time in my entire existence, I genuinely do not care. The heavy, suffocating chain of the golden child has been completely dissolved by the salt water and the silence. I survived the absolute worst of their parasitic nature, not by fighting them in the mud, but by aggressively securing my boundaries with impenetrable legal architecture and walking quietly away. The corporate boardroom, the luxury yachts, the frantic automatic transfers, they all feel like a movie I watched a very long time ago. True legacy isn't the wealth you inherit or the money you consistently provide, but the absolute peace you manage to fiercely protect within your own soul. If this story brought you even a fraction of clarity, or if you are currently gathering the immense courage to finally walk away from your own toxic situation, please share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of survival. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and always remember to fiercely protect your peace. I am simply alive.